after serving the mandatory national service. So I worked on film sets. I also attended undergraduate film school at LaSalle College of the Arts. So this was a very formative period for me. This was a time that I was exposed to films I might never had access to. In 2010, I graduated from LaSalle and I moved to LA in 2012 to attend the American Film Institute. I was on a scholarship from the government in Singapore and I did my master's in directing. Moving to California at that time was also a new chapter for me personally and also artistically. And after graduating, I traveled between California and Singapore and came back to work on a few projects, including Ajuma. So let's go into the first chapter. This was between 2007 and 2010. I remember I was working at a film cafe in Singapore. This was on a street called Haji Lane. It was gentrified. It was a very short, very tiny little lane in Singapore, a lot of shop houses. And there was a film cafe that existed there. And it was a cafe that you can screen films. I remember this was a time when I got to meet independent filmmakers. I got to meet artists. I got to meet musicians from all over who would come hang at the cafe. It was also a time a manager would let me curate films, and I got to watch films that I never would have when I was younger. So I wanted to work on film sets. And through the people I meet at the cafe, I managed to work on film sets. And I enrolled in an undergraduate film program at LaSalle. This was the time I made short films. I remember the very first short film that we had to make was a theme. You learn a little bit more about yourself, and the theme was autobiography. I've been trying to find this film with all my hard drive. I couldn't find it. I have never uploaded it, and it should be somewhere in my hard disk, but I couldn't find it. The brief is you have to be in the film, and there's no dialogue. I remember it was a short film of me set against the soundtrack of a Pedro Almodovar film called Talk to Her. We shot in an apartment that was going to be due for demolition. I put on my mom's clothes and I started putting on her makeup and trying to understand my mom. So this was the very first film I've ever made as an adult. But this picture here, this is a film that I made called Visiting, which you can find online. It was something I wrote that I got my grandmother to act in. My grandmother she used to perform as entertainer and singer in some sort of fair in the 60s. So there was a very brief period in her life where performing was something that was a big part of her. So going into the influence as an undergraduate film student, I thought about who I looked up to and what I was exposed to, which formed a lot of what we're going to talk about today is melodrama. But somehow I look back at these influences. They seem all over the place, but then it also makes sense. I was very drawn to melodrama. The melodrama of Pedro Almodovar, which you see top left corner, is a film called Women on the Verge of Nervous Breakdown. Almodovar is, of course, still is a huge influence for me. Although not my first Almodovar film, for me, this film was pure melodrama and pure camp. And it is sort of this startling, mindful depiction of how women feel exacerbated because of men's deceit. So it's a really fun film to watch. P. Ramlee is someone who is very important in Singapore cinema. Singapore cinema has a history that goes back when we were a part of Malaya. There was a Singaporean artist, Ming Wong, who is based in Berlin. His works on cinema was a huge influence on the way I see film. This was part of a bigger exhibition that he did called Life of Imitation. This celebrates and reflects on the context of golden age of Singapore cinema in the 1950s and 60s. So this is an era of nation building. There was a lot of struggle about rapid modernization and cultural flux in Singapore. What we see in this poster here is four Malay stories, and inspired by the works of Malay showbiz icon P. Ramlee. Ming Wong sort of attempted to sort of learn his Malay lines to portray a spectrum of 16 stock characters that we see in P. Ramlee's films. And it's a revisitation of the golden age of cinema in the 1950s and 60s through the performative veneers of language and identity. And on the right is Ozu's Equinox Flowers, which is his very first colored film. So these are sort of a brief overview of my early influences that would later shape the works that I put out. There were 4 short films I made, and we're going to watch a few clips of it. First, as I said, I was visiting with my grandmother. So this is a film about this woman, a social worker who visits elderly women every week. They have conversations. She talks about how her kids never visit her, and she would buy the lottery every week. For her, if she wins, it would be a little hope that they will come visit. So it's a little poignant little film that I got my grandmother to act in. National Day is sort of a film that I started writing in a way to kind of look at Singapore, but also it's a commentary on our country as a family unit. National Day is the day where Singapore celebrates our birthday. On this film, National Day is also the 7th day after this family patriarch has passed away. And culturally, there's a moment where on the 7th day after the person dies, his spirit might come home to see his or her family for the last time. So National Day was about this family waiting for their father to come back home on the 7th day. It happens to be National Day, and they understand their own grief towards their parent and also towards her husband, I guess, in this film. It was a fairly successful film. It did well. The school would send the film to film festivals, and it was the first film that allowed me to be exposed to this world of film festivals. I was a very young man, and it was very new to me. Then I was exposed to other short filmmakers around the world.